The country is mourning one of the foremost advocates for women's rights and progressive values. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has died at the age of 87. Ginsburg was a trailblazer in the fight for gender equality for more than 50 years. She made landmark arguments against gender and sex discrimination, all while fighting off inequities in her own career pursuits. Under President Clinton, she became only the second woman on the nation's high court. Though small in stature, her legacy looms large in the ongoing battle to guarantee justice for all citizens. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford has more on an American icon.
Mr. President, I am grateful beyond measure.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg's 1993 nomination to the Supreme Court hardly seemed possible 34 years earlier, when she graduated from Columbia Law School at the top of her class.
There was not a single firm in the entire city of New York that would offer me a job.
She said she had 3 strikes against her. She was Jewish, a woman, and the ultimate deal breaker, a mother.
And legal employers feared that I would be staying home more than I would be showing up for work.
But it was that kind of unequal treatment that drove her to become a law professor and eventually head the Women's Rights Project at the ACLU, where she argued 6 landmark cases before the Supreme Court, winning 5 in the fight to end gender discrimination.
She is to the women's movement what former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall was to the movement for the rights of African Americans.
I, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
On the highest court, Justice Ginsburg's conservative colleagues took issue with her more modern interpretation of the Constitution. She explained her perspective to Mike Wallace.
The genius of our Constitution is that over now more than 200, sometimes turbulent years, that we has expanded.
Serving almost 3 decades on the court, she was diagnosed with cancer multiple times. And when her husband of 56 years died in 2010, Justice Ginsburg was back on the bench the next day. She credited their long and happy marriage to a piece of advice from her mother-in-law.
She said, "Dear, in every good marriage, it helps sometimes to be a little deaf." And I have followed that advice, not only in dealing with my dear spouse, but in dealing with my colleagues.
The soft-spoken justice was good friends with her often bombastic conservative colleague, Antonin Scalia. During an interview conducted with his widow more than a year after Scalia's death in 2016, Ginsburg longed for a time when friendships like theirs were commonplace.
That kind of collegiality, good relations, people who liked and respected each other, even though they disagreed on some important questions. My hope is that in my lifetime, we will get back to the way it once was.
Jan Crawford, CBS News.
I want to bring in Gillian Metzger. She clerked for Justice Ginsburg in 1997 and 98, and she's now a professor of constitutional law at Ginsburg's alma mater, Columbia Law School. Professor Metzger, thank you for joining us on what I am sure is a difficult day for you. Tell us a little bit more about Justice Ginsburg behind the scenes. What did clerking for her reveal about the person that she was?
Well, she was a remarkable person, for sure. You clerked for her. To begin with, you're at the Supreme Court, which is just awe-inspiring on its own. And you work incredibly hard, but no matter how hard you work, the justice works harder than you. She just was tireless. And, I think a lot of the power of her opinions and why she left such an impact on people was because of the care she put into every word. I mean, every comma, honestly, got her attention, and she would very rigorously build up her arguments. And that's actually a legacy that she's given to all of her clerks. All of us, I think, carry a little RBG on our shoulder, looking over when we're writing something, pointing out that, that clause doesn't go there, that kind of thing. It was just really a remarkable experience.
Well, no issue is more important to Justice Ginsburg than equality. So how did she influence the law to be more equal for Americans of all genders, sexes, and races?
Well, so one thing to remember about the justice is that she was an advocate before she joined the bench. So her impact on the law and equality began when she started to bring litigation on women's equality, and really, 1971 got the court to acknowledge that constitutionally you could not discriminate against women. And then when she joins the court, she really cements that legacy, and she does it because her vision of equality had I think it's such a deep root in reality. She wasn't interested in abstract formalisms. She was interested in what equality means day to day. And so she coined a term, full citizenship stature, the ability of women to aspire, to achieve in just the ways that men did, but also the ability of men to aspire and achieve in ways and in jobs and occupations that were traditionally thought of for women. And that was one of the things she did as an advocate that stayed true to her vision of equality over time. She would often bring cases on behalf of men to show how gender stereotypes and gender restrictions really harmed all of us, not just women.
That was truly a unique position that she had, and I think that that's interesting that you point out how she came into the court with a legacy of advocacy. Though Justice Ginsburg was also a champion of abortion rights, she didn't actually agree with the court's decision to take on Roe versus Wade. It made her uncomfortable, and she explained that to you in a 2013 conversation at Columbia. Can you tell us a little bit about her problems with the court deciding to take up that case, and how does it serve as an example of her approach as a jurist?
Well, I think one of the things that Justice Ginsburg emphasized was, first of all, the question of how do you achieve change. I think that her concern with Roe was that it was not, it was too all at once, and that to build on it incrementally could have left it to be more lasting and not as vulnerable to attack. But I think the more pressing point is that she saw reproductive rights as essential to equality. And this goes back to her idea about how you have to look at what equality means in real life. So she was committed to reproductive rights in part because she knew that unless women can control whether and when they have a child, they will never achieve equality in the workplace or in any aspect of their lives. And it was that connection to equality that she really, that drove her. And you see it, she certainly was a strong advocate for reproductive rights. One of her famous dissents came in the Gonzalez versus Carhart case, where the court upheld a congressional ban on late-term abortions. And she was just scathing in her attack on the outdated understandings of women's ability to make decisions for themselves that underlay the majority's decision in that case.
Well, as a member of the liberal minority on the court, Justice Ginsburg became as well known, as you point out, for her dissents. Why did she find it so important to write such powerful opposing decisions, even when she knew that she was in the minority?
I think it actually reflected her optimism for the country and the court. She knew that she was in the minority now. She hoped that she wouldn't be in the minority in the future. And that, of course, had been the path of her efforts in the law. She had been advocating a position that didn't exist before she started pushing her gender equality cases in the 1970s. And she always saw the potential for us to more fully realize the Constitution. She would emphasize how we, the people in this country, was always an expanding we. And I think that the dissents were her effort to articulate that vision for what we could be and to set out the ideals for what as a nation we could achieve. And she hoped that there would be a court and justices and a people who would embrace it in the future.
And it's so interesting hearing you speak about that, because you see the progression of our country's history along with her life. When she applied to be a clerk at the Supreme Court, she was denied on the basis of her sex. And as we know, later in her life, Justice Ginsburg became known as the Notorious RBG. Mm-hmm. Are you surprised that she became a pop culture icon among younger Americans in particular? And how did she react to that development?
All right, so I have to confess, I did not see that one coming. when I was clerking for her. But I love it. I mean, I can't actually imagine a better icon for us to have, this amazing woman who was such a trailblazer and becomes an icon because of her voice, because of her vision. It really thrills me. I think she loved it, to be honest. I think she loved it in part because it showed how far we had come. She would say that she was often asked by little girls, did you always dream of being a Supreme Court justice? And of course, coming from her past, where she didn't think she'd be able to get a job because she had a child and was a woman coming out of law school, to have this idea that she'd be dreaming of being a Supreme Court justice, and that would be a natural question for a little girl to ask today. I think that just thrilled her, and that's what I think her role as Notorious RBG kind of stood for, that she was the attainment of all those dreams.
It is so fascinating to see that. I remember actually last Halloween, because we're approaching that time of year, seeing actually some children dressed up as the Notorious RBG, and that's just not something that you normally see from a Supreme Court justice.
This is true.
Changing directions just a little bit, as a constitutional lawyer yourself, what is her most lasting impact on the law? And do you have any concerns with the makeup of the court now, as they are looking to take up some very important cases now with her seat vacant?
Well, I do think her lasting impact is what I was talking about, that ability to articulate fundamental values of justice and equality with an eye to what they mean in reality. And there are justices who I think have a more formalistic view of what the Constitution means. And I think it's a false formalism that then doesn't take account of what lived reality is for people. And I do find that concerning. I think it's troubling how much the court has become so involved in political debates in terms of just thinking about the court and its institutional stature and credibility. And I think it will really be incumbent on the court and the justices to show that they are adhering to legal principles and to not be seeming to be politically driven in various ways, to preserve that crucial institutional legitimacy that the court has.
Do you think her passing will have any influence on the justices that are remaining as they take up these pieces, or as they take up these really crucial court cases in her absence?
I think that she was a really important voice. She was the last Justice Marshall before her was an advocate, and then she was an advocate. There are other justices who I think try very much to give voice similarly to lived realities. I think Justice Sotomayor is somebody who really emphasizes that. But I wouldn't be surprised if the other justices try to see the world as Ruth might have seen the world when they're considering cases. And we'll have to see what happens coming up. There are certainly many important cases that are slated to come before the court. And of course, with the election, you never know what might also come before the court.
Gillian Metzger, thank you.
Thank you.